He didn't just betray me. He brought his mistress into our home, the very place I thought was my safe haven. And the most painful part? His entire family already knew, and they all chose to cover for him. I remember that night so vividly. I was in the kitchen, reheating dinner I had lovingly prepared, excited because my husband told me he was bringing home someone special. I thought it was a colleague, maybe a business partner, someone I could welcome and impress. But when the door opened, my heart shattered. He walked in, smiling, with a younger woman clinging to his arm. They looked like a couple straight out of a love story, except it wasn't mine. With pride in his voice, he said, "This is someone very important to me." I stood frozen, my chest tightened, my hands trembling. But the true shock came when I looked around the table. My mother-in-law smiled warmly at the girl. My sister-in-law nodded knowingly. It was as if this wasn't a secret at all, as if I was the only one who had been left in the dark. That was the moment I realized. I wasn't just betrayed by my husband. I was betrayed by an entire family. That night was supposed to be like any other, ordinary and warm, but it became the night that shattered everything I thought I knew about my marriage. I had spent the afternoon preparing his favorite dishes, setting the table carefully, even putting on a dress he once told me he loved, because he had said we would be having an important guest. My heart was full of curiosity, wondering who this person could be. Maybe someone who would open new doors for his career, someone I could impress with my kindness and hospitality. But when I heard the door open and saw him walk in, holding the hand of that woman, smiling like a man in love, my world collapsed in silence. For a moment, I thought it must be a cruel joke, some twisted prank. But his voice, so steady and filled with pride, proved me wrong. He introduced her as someone special, and he said it so naturally, as if I were just another piece of furniture in the room, not his wife. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but my voice was trapped somewhere in my throat. My eyes darted around the room, searching for support, for some sign that someone else saw how wrong this was. Instead, what I saw made my blood run cold. My mother-in-law, the woman I had cared for, cooked for, respected like my own mother, stood up and welcomed the girl with open arms, smiling warmly as though she had been waiting for this moment. My sister-in-law nodded with approval, her eyes glimmering with something that felt like satisfaction. They weren't shocked, they weren't confused. They knew. They had always known. And yet no one thought to warn me. No one thought to stand by my side. In that instant, I realized I was completely alone in that house. As the evening dragged on, the nightmare deepened. My husband sat at the table with her beside him, his hand occasionally brushing against hers, their eyes locking in ways that once belonged to me. He laughed louder than usual, told stories with a joy I hadn't seen in years, and all the while his family encouraged it. They asked her questions, complimented her, as though she was already part of the family, while I sat there, a ghost in my own life. I wanted to leave the table, to escape the humiliation, but my body refused to move. My heart pounded in my chest, and tears burned in the back of my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. If I cried, they would see me as weak, and I knew at that moment that weakness was exactly what they expected. I forced myself to swallow the food that tasted like ash, each bite heavier than the last, while the woman beside him smiled sweetly, pretending to be innocent, pretending she wasn't destroying the life I had built with my own hands. My mind was screaming, how could he do this? How could he bring her here, into my home, into the space where I cooked, where I dreamed, where we once held each other close at night? How could his family betray me, cover for him, and act like this was something acceptable? I thought of the nights I stayed up waiting for him when he worked late, the mornings I woke up early to make him breakfast, the sacrifices I made so he could pursue his career. All of it seemed like a cruel joke, a one-sided devotion to a man who had long stopped valuing me. Every smile on their faces was like a knife cutting deeper into my chest. They didn't just tolerate this betrayal, they embraced it, as if I was the outsider, as if I had no rightful place at that table anymore. My husband avoided my eyes, and when he finally looked at me, it was with the calm indifference of someone who no longer cared. In that moment, I understood something terrifying. They had already made space for her, and I was the one who was slowly being erased. That night ended in silence for me. After everyone left the table, after the laughter faded and the dishes were cleared, I went to the bedroom alone. He didn't follow me right away. He stayed out there, talking and laughing with her, while I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the walls that suddenly felt like a prison. When he finally came in, his face showed no guilt, no shame. He simply told me to accept things as they were, that she was important to him now, but that it didn't mean he didn't care about me. As if I should be grateful for the scraps of affection he was willing to leave behind. My body trembled with rage and pain, but I said nothing. I lay there that night, listening to his steady breathing beside me, wondering how long he had planned this, how long his family had been part of this deception, and how blind I had been to the truth. I didn't sleep at all. I just stared into the darkness, my mind racing, my heart breaking, and the crushing weight of betrayal pressing down on my chest. That was the beginning of the end. The days that followed felt like walking through a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. Every corner of that house felt contaminated, every sound echoing with betrayal. She was there more often now, slipping into our routines as if she belonged, and no one seemed to question it but me. At first, I thought maybe she was just visiting. Maybe this was some twisted phase he was going through. But it became painfully clear that this was his new reality, and he expected me to accept it. His family made it worse. They treated her with a warmth they hadn't shown me in years, offering her tea, laughing at her jokes, complimenting her outfits, while I sat in the background like a shadow, invisible in the life I had once built. I overheard whispers from my mother-in-law, telling her how strong she was, how happy she made him, as if I hadn't been there through his struggles, his late nights, his failures and successes. I wanted to scream, to remind them that I had been the one who stood by him when he was nothing, but my words stayed trapped behind my teeth, because what was the point? No one wanted to hear my truth. I started to notice the subtle ways they tried to push me aside. My sister-in-law would make remarks about how modern women didn't mind sharing, about how marriage isn't perfect, hinting that I should just be grateful my husband still provided for me. My mother-in-law would insist that men had needs, that as long as he still came home at night, I should count myself lucky. They spoke as if I were the unreasonable one, as if expecting loyalty from my husband was some outdated fantasy. Every word chipped away at me. Every smile they gave her was another slap in my face. The humiliation was unbearable, but what broke me was the loneliness. I would lie awake at night, listening to the muffled sounds of their conversations, the soft laughter drifting through the walls, and I realized that I had no one in that house, no ally, no friend, not even my husband. He avoided any confrontation, brushing off my questions with dismissive comments, telling me not to make a scene, not to embarrass him. As if his betrayal wasn't the real shame. One evening she cooked dinner in my kitchen. I watched her move around the space I had poured my heart into, where every pot and pan had a memory attached, and she acted as if it belonged to her. My husband praised her cooking, his family raved about how talented she was, and no one even glanced at me. I sat at the table, my hands trembling beneath the surface, forcing myself to breathe through the rage boiling inside me. It wasn't just that she was there. It was that they were all helping her replace me, piece by piece, until I no longer recognized my own life. I started questioning myself. Was I not enough? Had I failed him somehow? The weight of their judgment made me doubt my own worth. And yet, beneath the pain, there was a flicker of anger, a spark that refused to die. I knew deep down that this wasn't my fault, that love should never feel like erasure, and yet the silence of everyone around me made me feel like I was crazy. The more I resisted, the more they tried to make me comply. My mother-in-law told me to stop being dramatic, that women in her generation knew how to endure, that if I wanted to keep my marriage, I should learn to be silent. My sister-in-law smirked when I protested, saying I was too emotional, that men needed excitement, and I couldn't provide it. And my husband had the audacity to tell me that she was not a threat, that I should see her as an addition, not a replacement, as if love were something that could be divided and rationed like food on a plate. Every day I felt my identity slipping further away, swallowed by their lies, their gaslighting, their cruel expectation that I should just accept humiliation as part of my marriage. But I couldn't. I felt it in my bones. I was reaching my breaking point. The pressure inside me was building. the silence becoming unbearable, and I knew that if I stayed quiet any longer, I would lose myself completely. One night, when they were all sitting in the living room, laughing at a joke she had made, I watched them from the hallway. They looked so comfortable, so united, while I stood there invisible, like a ghost haunting my own house. And something inside me snapped. My heart pounded as I stepped into the room, my voice shaking but loud enough to silence them all. I asked him how long he had been planning this, how long they had all been lying to me. The room froze, their smiles evaporated, but no one answered. My husband looked at me with irritation, like I was ruining his evening, and finally said that I was overreacting, that this was just the way things were now. The casual cruelty of his words nearly broke me, but instead it lit a fire in me. I realized then that I had been waiting for someone to defend me, to acknowledge the pain I was in, but that day I understood. No one was coming to save me. If I wanted to protect myself, I had to become my own defender. That was the moment I stopped being silent. The night I finally raised my voice was the night something shifted inside me. For so long, I had let them talk over me, dismiss me, erase me. But as I stood there demanding answers, I realized that silence had been my biggest prison. He brushed me off like I was nothing, like I was some annoying noise he could tune out. But this time I didn't back down. My words came out sharp, trembling with rage, accusing him of betraying me, accusing his family of conspiring against me. Their faces hardened. My mother-in-law scolded me, telling me to stop embarrassing the family as though I was the one who had dragged a mistress into our home. My sister-in-law rolled her eyes, calling me childish, saying I should learn to adapt if I wanted to keep my marriage. And the woman, his mistress, sat there with a smug little smile, pretending to be calm, but her eyes betrayed the triumph she felt at seeing me unravel. That smile was gasoline on the fire burning in my chest. I couldn't hold back anymore. I reminded them of everything I had done for this family, every sacrifice I had made, every moment I had put their needs above my own. I reminded him of the nights I stayed awake, waiting for him, the years I stood beside him when no one else believed in him, the countless times I swallowed my pride for the sake of keeping peace. And now, after all of that, this was my reward? To be treated like I was disposable? To be mocked in my own home? My voice cracked as I spoke, my hands trembling, but I could see for the first time a flicker of unease in their eyes. They hadn't expected me to fight back. They had expected me to remain silent, to continue shrinking into the background while they replaced me piece by piece. But I wasn't going to let them destroy me without a fight. That night ended with him storming off, slamming the door behind him, his family trailing after him like loyal soldiers, leaving me standing in the ruins of my own dignity. I cried until my body shook, not because I still loved him, but because I realized how completely I had been betrayed. It wasn't just him, it was all of them. And yet, beneath the tears, something hardened inside me. I began to see clearly that I couldn't stay trapped in this cycle of humiliation. The next days were tense. He acted cold, distant, spending more time with her, while his family kept their eyes on me, watching, waiting to see if I would break. But instead of collapsing, I started to observe. I watched the way they enabled her, how they encouraged her, how they justified his betrayal. I began to understand that their silence and approval had nothing to do with me. It was about them. They had chosen comfort over morality, convenience over integrity, and I had been the casualty of their cowardice. Realizing that freed something inside me. The pain didn't vanish, but it started to transform into resolve. I began to imagine a life without him. A life where I wasn't constantly humiliated, where I wasn't erased. At first the thought terrified me. I had built my entire identity around being his wife, his partner. But the more I imagined it, the more I felt a strange lightness, as though there was still a chance for me to reclaim myself. One afternoon, while he was out with her, I opened a drawer and pulled out the box of letters he once wrote me, the ones filled with promises of forever. I read them one by one, my tears soaking the paper, but with every letter I felt less sorrow and more clarity. The man who wrote those words no longer existed. He had abandoned me long before he walked through that door with her. The truth was, I had been holding on to a ghost. That realization hurt, but it also set me free. That night when he returned home, smelling of her perfume, He found me sitting at the table with those letters spread out in front of me. I looked him in the eye and told him I wanted the truth, not the sugar-coated lies, not the excuses. I wanted him to admit what we both knew, that he had chosen her, that he no longer loved me, that I had been replaced. For the first time, he hesitated. His eyes darted away, his jaw tightened, and in that silence, I finally had my answer. He didn't need to say the words. I could see it written all over him. And instead of breaking me, it solidified my resolve. I wasn't going to beg for his love anymore. I wasn't going to fight for a place in a house that had already shut me out. If he and his family had decided I was disposable, then it was time I stopped clinging to them, as if they were my salvation. The next morning, I started making quiet plans. I reached out to an old friend I hadn't spoken to in years, someone who reminded me of who I used to be before I was swallowed by his world. I asked questions about lawyers, about my rights, about what it would take to leave. Every step was terrifying, but also empowering. For the first time in years, I was thinking about myself, not about him, not about pleasing his family, not about keeping the peace. It was the beginning of a new kind of fight, the fight to take back my life. And though I was still surrounded by their whispers and their judgment, I carried a secret flame inside me now. They thought they had broken me. They thought I would accept whatever scraps they offered. But they were wrong. Very soon, they would see a side of me they had never expected. The decision to leave didn't come all at once. It grew inside me, slowly, like a storm gathering strength. At first I told myself I was just preparing, just exploring possibilities. But deep down, I knew the truth. I was no longer his wife in anything but name, and staying in that house was killing me a little more every day. The more I thought about it, the more I realized I wasn't just fighting for my marriage anymore. I was fighting for myself, for the woman I had lost somewhere along the way. I had been his support, his shadow, his caretaker, and in return he had stripped me of my dignity, paraded his betrayal in front of me, and expected me to smile through it. No, I couldn't do it any longer. The breaking point came during one of those suffocating family dinners. She was there again, sitting beside him like she had always belonged, laughing at his stories, touching his arm, slipping little comments that made her sound like a partner, not a guest. His family encouraged it, nodding and smiling, their loyalty wrapped around her like a cloak. I sat at the far end of the table, quiet, watching them replace me in plain sight. Every bite of food tasted like bitterness, every laugh stabbed deeper. But this time, I wasn't just swallowing the pain. I was preparing. As the plates were cleared, as the conversations drifted into comfortable small talk, I pushed back my chair and stood. My voice was calm, steady, but loud enough to cut through the laughter. They all turned to look at me, surprised, maybe annoyed, expecting another outburst they could dismiss. But this time, it wasn't rage or tears that filled my words, it was clarity. I told them I had finally seen the truth, that I understood now I had been living in a house where loyalty meant nothing, where promises were disposable, where betrayal was not only tolerated, but celebrated. I looked at him, my husband, the man who had once sworn to love me forever, and told him he had broken something that could never be repaired. His face shifted from irritation to unease because he knew I wasn't pleading this time. I was declaring. I told them all that I would no longer play the role of the silent wife who swallowed humiliation to keep their family comfortable. I told them I refused to share my marriage, my dignity, my life, with a woman who had stolen what wasn't hers to take, and then I said the words I had been afraid of for so long. I am leaving. The room froze. My mother-in-law's smile slipped, her eyes widening as if she couldn't believe the obedient daughter-in-law she had known was suddenly defying her. My sister-in-law's face twisted with disbelief, then anger, as though my refusal to be erased was somehow an insult to her. And him. He stared at me like I had just spoken in a foreign language, his mouth opening but no words coming out. For once, the control was not in his hands. I felt my chest rise with a strength I hadn't felt in years. The silence that followed was heavy, filled with their shock, their disapproval, but I didn't care anymore. For so long I had begged for their acceptance, their validation, their approval, but at that moment I realized I didn't need it. I had only ever needed my own. I walked away from that table, my footsteps echoing through the house that had never truly been mine, and for the first time in a long time, I felt free. That night I packed a small bag. Not everything, just the essentials, the pieces of me that mattered most. I looked around the bedroom, once filled with memories, now suffocating with betrayal, and I felt no urge to cling to it. The bed where we had once whispered dreams now felt like a grave. The walls that had held our laughter now held only lies. I left the box of letters on the dresser, one final reminder of the man he used to be, a man who no longer existed. When he came into the room and saw me with the bag, his face darkened. He told me I was being foolish, dramatic, that I would regret this. He tried to remind me of everything we had built together, as if the roof over my head should be enough to keep me shackled to his betrayal. But I looked him in the eye and told him the truth, that the life we had built was already gone, that he had destroyed it the moment he chose her, and that I refused to live as a ghost in the ruins of a marriage that no longer existed. He raised his voice, his anger spilling over, but I didn't flinch. I had spent too many nights trembling in silence, too many days shrinking into the background. Not anymore. I walked past him, past the family who watched in stunned silence, and I opened the door. The night air hit my face, cool and sharp, carrying with it the taste of freedom. I didn't know exactly where I was going, or what the future held, but I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I was no longer theirs to control. As I stepped into the darkness, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. It was fragile, like a flame in the wind, but it was mine. And for the first time in so long, I allowed myself to believe that maybe, just maybe, I would find the woman I had lost. The first days after I left felt surreal, like I was walking through the wreckage of a life I no longer recognized. I stayed with a friend who opened her door without hesitation, holding me while I sobbed, listening to the words I had been too ashamed to speak for so long. She reminded me that I wasn't crazy, that I wasn't weak, that I deserved so much more than what I had been given. And slowly the fog began to lift. I started to see my reflection again, not as a broken wife abandoned for someone else, but as a woman who had survived the fire and was still standing. It wasn't easy. There were nights when the loneliness felt unbearable, when the memories came crashing back, when I doubted if I had made the right choice. But then I remembered the silence of that dinner table, the smug smile of his mistress, the betrayal in the eyes of his family, and I knew I could never go back. That house had been a cage, and leaving it was the first step toward freedom. With each passing day, I began to rebuild. I met with a lawyer, I gathered my strength, and I started to envision a life without him. For the first time in years, I asked myself what I wanted. Not what he wanted, not what his family demanded, but what my heart longed for. I realized I had dreams that had been buried beneath years of sacrifice. I had passions I had abandoned in the name of being a good wife. Now, piece by piece, I began to claim them back. I signed up for a class I had always wanted to take. I reconnected with friends I had pushed away, and I allowed myself to laugh again, even if the laughter was still tinged with sadness. Slowly, my world began to expand, no longer defined by the man who had betrayed me, but by the woman I was becoming. And something incredible happened. The more I chose myself, the stronger I felt. The tears became less frequent, the nights less heavy. I began to carry myself differently, not as a woman who had been discarded, but as a woman who had walked away with her dignity intact. People noticed. Friends told me I seemed lighter, braver, as if I had been reborn. And maybe in a way I had. I heard through whispers that his mistress had practically moved into that house, that his family continued to embrace her as if she had always been part of them. Once the thought would have gutted me, but now it only made me feel sorry for them. They hadn't won anything. They had simply chosen to live in a lie together, bound by betrayal and convenience. Let them have each other. I was done. My freedom, my peace, my self-worth, they were worth more than any marriage built on broken promises. One evening, months after I left, I walked past our old home. I stopped for a moment, staring at the windows that once glowed with the light of dinners and laughter. Now they looked cold, empty, no longer holding me captive. I smiled softly to myself, realizing that the house no longer had power over me. It was just bricks and walls, a shell of what I had once believed it to be. I turned and walked away, each step steady, each breath lighter. And that night, lying in my new bed, In my own space filled with my own choices, I realized something profound. He hadn't broken me. His betrayal had scarred me, yes, but it had also forced me to find a strength I never knew I had. It had pushed me to stop living for others and start living for myself. For so long I thought I needed him to feel complete, but the truth was, I had always been whole. I had just forgotten. To anyone listening to my story, I want you to remember this. Betrayal can make you feel like your world has ended, like you have been stripped of everything. But sometimes endings are just beginnings in disguise. You don't have to accept humiliation to keep a family together. You don't have to erase yourself to hold on to someone who has already let go of you. You have the power to walk away, to rebuild, to rise again. I did, and if I could, so can you. This isn't just a story of betrayal, it's a story of rebirth. Because in losing him, I found myself, and that is the greatest victory of all.